everyone, and welcome to the WARC Podcast. My name is Rica Facundo, Managing Editor of WARC APAC, and today we're discussing a fantastic topic, which is about the future of marketing, and guess what? It isn't coming, it's already here, and we've been conditioned to miss it. AI has unlocked new capabilities, but brands pulling ahead aren't winning with the best tools, they're winning with the sharpest cultural instincts. And today, joining me to discuss this are two fantastic guests. We have Rachel Lowenstein, content creator and culture strategist, and Allison Knapp, Womack, who is the CEO of the Effie Lions Foundation.
Becoming a brand at the vanguard of culture is a challenging brief. Lions Learning is here to help. Sign up for the Influence of Culture course delivered by the award-winning marketing professor and cultural translator, Dr. Marcus Collins. This self-paced digital course draws on behavioural science and cultural scholarship across a variety of academic disciplines. You'll learn both the know-why and the know-how of culture, giving you the skills to build a brand operating system for long-term relevance. Sign up today at learning.lions.co.
Welcome to the podcast, both of you.
Thanks, Rico. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right, let's get into it. I like to start podcasts sometimes with definitions because everyone has their own interpretation of certain terms. So, Rachel, you've built an entire career helping brands navigate and connect with culture. What is your definition of cultural intelligence, and what does the industry often get wrong about it?
I would define cultural intelligence as the distinct skill as being able to identify what is happening in culture beyond individual and fleeting trends and being able to apply that to what it means for brands and businesses. I think it is very easy to identify a singular trend or see a signal in culture, but the harder part of that is being able to see what is the higher level order of what that actually means culturally and socially, but also what does that mean for brands and businesses. So when I talk about cultural intelligence with brands, I'm not talking about this single trend that we see on social media. I'm talking about what is the higher order thinking that sits behind that trend that will reshape how brands and businesses operate.
So really going deeper under the surface and interrogating that why beyond the trend. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of sociology, a little bit of anthropology. It's, it really is a social science, as kind of esoteric as that sounds.
And Allison, at Cannes, the Effie Lions Foundation released a study with Ipsos saying that culture experts, can't get in the room where decisions are made. What did these decision makers get wrong about culture?
Wow. Well, I think it'll probably be helpful to take a step back and talk about what the Effie Lions Foundation is. We were created just over a year ago to make the industry more creative, effective, and open to all. So we support students who are emerging marketers to give them access to the industry when they may not have the connections or the proximity to get in the door. What's interesting at this moment is that in order for brands to grow, they have to connect with culture. And what the study showed is that students are so enthusiastic about marketing. They rate it 8 out of 10, 70% of them, but there's a catch. And that is that if the industry doesn't meet them where they are and recognize what they think is important and what they can contribute, they'll go somewhere else. They're not committing to marketing. They're committing to a career that allows them to be their best selves. Part one is retaining talent. Now, in a role in marketing where brands have to connect with culture, the role of people who can interpret it is more important than ever. Why? Because if you got it wrong before, you got a bad ad. And okay, it wasn't downstairs with all the award-winning work that's so amazing, but now it's a reputational, digital, viral disaster that can affect your business for the longer term. So having people who can interpret, who have taste, and who have judgment is so, so important. And the people coming into the industry right now have so much to offer that the industry desperately needs to succeed.
I totally agree. And one of the things I really love about this research and what both of you are doing is that idea of inclusivity, right? And getting more voices into the room to get heard, because these are the people who are at the front lines, right? So before we get into that, though, let's kind of interrogate a bit more about what's at stake, right? Allison, you hinted at it a little bit, where it's like maybe back in the day, it was maybe people were more forgiving. I don't know. But now we have AI. Everyone, has a phone, can voice their opinions online. Rachel, can you talk a little bit more about what's at stake here for brands if they get it wrong? Because arguably it has always been very important.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hinted at it. I think everyone has a megaphone today. Everyone's opinion can be known. And as Allison said, the risk might have been you don't get acknowledged at an industry event, or your brand kind of falls to the wayside and maybe you've lost a little bit of money investing in a campaign. But building culturally unintelligent marketing and losing industry talent, like, the students who may or may not want to be in this industry if the industry doesn't see their value with cultural intelligence, poses a massive reputational risk for brands. We saw a phenomenon that I coined last summer called Slop Girl Summer, where there was
Slop Girl
Slop
Summer.
Girl Summer. I wrote an op-ed about it. I had a video series, and I don't need to say which brands were participating in this. I think you can insert which brands were at the helm, but we saw a lot of brands having a race to the bottom and choosing to go after rage bait driven marketing because it's easy to get attention that way. And there's been data from brand tracking companies that show that didn't actually help their brands, it hurt their brands. So when we talk about cultural intelligence, it's not just the kind of fluffy, nice, soft part of marketing. It is fundamental to business growth. And what we saw with the research is that young people feel it so intuitively, like they understand culture. And we talk in the young people know so much about culture today. They've always known so much about culture, but they have the ability and access to share those opinions because of social media. And I think brands need to take that very seriously and invest in that type of talent.
The inversion of authority. I remember when I was younger and in the room, and you want to share, right? But then there's a bit of a power imbalance there, or you're scared, right? But at the same time, these are the voices that we need to cultivate and give a platform. With all the work that you're doing, Allison, how do you kind of hope to maybe address that, and kind of build that pipeline so that more of those voices really get heard on in the boardroom and the marketing discussions?
Well, I think it starts from, let's go back to Slop Girl Summer, because I really like that. But this idea that it's not about making content. You can make infinite amounts of content now, and it doesn't matter. What matters is making the right content, with taste and judgment that connects with brand, that connects with culture in the right way. And the people who are growing up, digitally, um, can do that better than anybody else. So then the question is, how do you create a systemic solution to a systemic problem? So we take a step back and start to say, okay, well, the number of entry-level jobs is shrinking. Why do we need to give more people access to the industry? And there's a couple of layers of the onion to peel back here because, yes, depending on the numbers, I've seen numbers of entry-level jobs declining 8 to 12% in the US, and we've seen those numbers mirrored globally, although, like any other thing, the data is kind of all over, and there's no one consistent thing. But in that environment where an quote unquote entry-level job often requires 2 or 3 years of experience, you need that talent to be performing as strongly as possible. And, notice how I made a transition from jobs to talent. This isn't about butts and seats. This is about finding the individuals who are uniquely skilled to take your brand forward. And if you don't cast a wide net and look for inclusive talent, you are behind before you even start because you won't have those voices at the table to make those connections with brand and culture. And that's the systemic issue we want to create a solution to address. So the Voices of the Future Fellows program is certainly a first step. We have 12 fellows for an 8-month-long learning journey. They are doing a lot of other things, and the learning that comes from that program, as well as the study that we did in partnership with Ipsos, that's the focus of the presentation, as well as the Effie Collegiate program that we're running in 11 countries right now, all are giving more students insights and access, and also allowing us to help the industry come along and push and meet in the middle. So it's a win for everybody.
I think I would love to build on some stuff that you touched on. I think to your question about, cultivating this type of talent and us potentially seeing a loss of talent because companies are cutting back on entry-level roles, I think about what's going to happen in 10 years when those would-be entry-level roles who have so much knowledge and culture and need to be fostered with the kind of like harder skills of marketing. But I also think about some of the fellows who, and you were kind of alluding to it, who are doing this work already. Like there's one who built a meme page that has, is it 2 million followers? And we all know this type of talent is out there where they're just doing things themselves. And something that we came to the conclusion of in the research with Ipsos is that the students don't need the marketing industry, but the marketing industry really needs them. And seeing some of the talent that's at the table with the fellows, I think it just gives you a snapshot into how this generation is thinking about the marketing industry, which is that they know a lot about culture and brand growth and brand affinity and all the things that brands need right now. And their type of skills need to be cultivated in the industry, but we have to reorient how we work with young people in that way.
The industry is full of opinions, but brands don't make decisions based on opinions. They make them based on evidence they can trust. Partner with the leading industry authority on marketing effectiveness to make your case. Lions Advisory brings together decades of trusted expertise from WARC, Cannes Lions, Effie, and Contagious to create industry-defining thought leadership. From crafting the narrative to amplifying it at scale and placing it in front of key decision makers. So your story doesn't just add to the conversation, it defines it. Learn more at lions.co/thought leadership.
I want to spend some time talking about a really key distinction that you made, Allison, which is this distinction between talent and jobs, if I heard you correctly. Can you elaborate more about that nuance? And I feel like that's an important conversation to have now where, jobs feel very functional, like, you have to, it's head count at the end of the day. But, when you're talking about talent, you're talking about an individual with a life of experiences and taste. Can you elaborate why you made that distinction, why we need to make that distinction now?
Because it isn't a butts and seats operation. It's not about filling roles. It's about thinking, even from the early stages, who are the people that will help your organization win in the marketplace? And, it goes beyond, I think, a job description and goes to how is that talent engaged, supported, cultivated? And I want to go back to the AI comment you made, which is, students are teaching themselves ahead of any school curriculum, the ones we talk to, that their universities can come up with. They're moving that quickly and they are sophisticated, nuanced, understand when it works, when it doesn't. I think one of the quotes was about, marketing is supposed to make you feel. AI doesn't make you feel. They know that, and they have so much to teach all of us that we have to think about deploying that talent differently.
I really like this conversation because it's about talent, right? And that's kind of one of the systemic issues. Rachel, in your experience, what are some of those other systemic issues that we need to face? Because you've been in this for a while, and you could argue that maybe there's more access now with tools, and you can post online, create out 2 million follower meme account. What are the problems that you were facing back then when you started out? Are they the same ones now? What do we need to address so that we can make it a lot more equitable for everyone?
Yeah, in the presentation we're doing on Wednesday, we talk about the fact that everyone's talking about the industry transforming, and we actually think it's transmuting, or it needs to transmute. And transmutation is different than transformation in that when you transmute something, you're changing the very nature of it. So it's no longer like the same thing. It actually becomes something totally different. And I think we're starting to see that transmutation happen regardless, right? Like AI is disrupting everything. The industry has become extremely complex, at times not to the benefit of brands or to consumers. And, as we talked about earlier with Soft Girl Summer, even though there's amazing creative work out there, there's work that's also becoming meaningless in a lot of ways. So we think that the industry needs to fundamentally change at its like very core. And I think one thing that brands and agencies and industry leaders need to think about is how do we move at the speed of culture when our industry doesn't move at the speed of culture historically, right? Like the very way we operate. I come from an agency background, and agencies are big and sometimes slow, and brands are also slow, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. So I look at the students and I see that they're building stuff on their own. They're teaching themselves AI models and using tools that historically might have taken a couple of months or a couple of years for a brand to integrate into their process. And I think when, Allison references that there's a lot to learn from young people, I look at that speed by which they are moving and think, although it feels impossible, surely there is a way for us to reorient how the marketing operations approach actually works to move faster, be less burdensome, and be in service of the brand and to the consumer.
I'll stick with you, Rachel. I mean, you talked about the process, right, and the bureaucracy and red tape involved that prevents a lot of brands and agency from moving at the speed of culture. And there's another barrier that I always see, which is kind of like budget, right? How, or like the operating model around it. Is it more about embedding these talents within the agency and giving them that leeway? Is it about, freelance, get freelance cultural strategists or researchers, which is also very hard to get budget for to get that kind of intelligence?
I think it can look a lot of ways. There's some interesting research coming out of Stanford, just to research some other or reference some other research. Stanford did a whole study on something called flash teams. I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but flash teams are essentially this idea where instead of having a dedicated team work on something, which can get bureaucratic and burdensome, you have just a couple of people who do a sprint on a project for a year, 6 months, and once that project is done, they're out, right? They don't stick around. It's almost a freelance model, but you give them a little bit more depth into your organization. And I could imagine for young people in particular, that might be really attractive. Like they want flexibility. They want the ability to be creative. They want to get their hands dirty with the work. We saw from the research that working on brands and campaigns that have impact in culture is really important to them. And I can imagine some sort of flexible talent model like a flash team or something similar, whether it's freelance or otherwise, could be an interesting way for brands and agencies to think about a new model of working. So you still get that depth and expertise because they're dedicated on a project for a while, but it allows them a little bit more flexibility, which we know young people are really looking for.
Allison, you've been working on this, I guess, from ground zero up, and which is always a very tough thing to do. So you're really confronting a lot of these problems head on. We've mentioned a couple. Talent is one, but are there any kind of other systemic issues that we need to really tackle to get to this transmutation? Was it transmutation? Is that a word?
Transmutation.
Transmutation. There you go. This transmutation of the industry.
Like any small organization, for me, the toughest thing is just moving at the speed that we'd like to versus the reality of our size. So to me, that's, we'll keep growing and making an impact. And I think if we can do the things we've set out to do well, we will have a tremendous impact. We reach almost 5,000 students every year right now. And, that number will only increase over time. And we're super excited about the change we can make.
And another problem that I usually face when I used to do this before is kind of the perspective or the gaze, right? And Rachel, this question is for you. I know you talked about Slop Girl Summer. I need to now read that. But the one that I did read was the really great one where you kind of dissected the Romantasy genre. And your argument there was that was always through the male gaze, right? But then arguably other kinds of cultural intelligence has different kind of gaze filtering into that. where does this sit during a time when, maybe DEI has been quietly retreating, or how do we kind of like address those biases like moving forward, especially if we have more people coming into the fore who are trying to represent the very thing that, brands want to tap into?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, both of us being cultural strategists, it's like the question in cultural strategy is whose perspective are you centering? I think this question, interestingly, although it's a question about DE&I, it's also a question about business, right? I think it's why when we try and separate the conversation of inclusion away from business, it fundamentally falls apart. Because when you are centering a perspective that does not meet the audience that you want to grow with, that audience is not going to understand your message. It might be a reputational risk for you. It's why cultural intelligence is intertwined with inclusivity work, because to the point that I wrote in the Romantasy essay, rom-coms are dying as a medium because they were always filtered through the lens of what male executives in Hollywood thought women wanted. And Romantasy is the top-selling book genre in the world, and it's not even close for second place because it's written by women, it's being read by women, the fan fiction, the fan art, the cosplay, it's all being done by women because women are saying this is actually what we find as being romantic or attractive to us. So although it feels a little bit disconnected, I think the Romantasy model is a really good model to look at to see this is an industry that's being propped up by female writers, by female consumers, by female creators, and it's also incredibly profitable. Like it is basically keeping the book industry solvent at this point. Um, and I think that's a really interesting model to think about because when you have women, LGBTQ people, communities of color driving those cultural strategy decisions, you will reap the rewards because they have a level of knowledge and expertise that it's not even intuitive because they've had to, you know, as a woman, just as an example, I've lived my life knowing what it feels like to be a woman in culture, and I can feed that to brands as a way to drive expertise for them. And that goes for any other identity groups. So when we talk about cultural intelligence and young people in particular who live so deeply in culture, um, it can come from the more immutable parts of your identity, like being a woman or an LGBTQ person or a neurodivergent person, whatever that is. It can also be, I'm obsessed with romantasy fandoms and I know so much about them. And hey, brand who wants to speak to women, you should really pay attention to this cultural signal. So it can be both. And I think that's a really important lens of expertise to know about. And it requires brands to think about inclusion, not as this like charity case, but it's incredibly important to their business.
Yeah, it's really the business side of it, right? You're actually tapping into an audience who is, the market for a potential new, line and whatnot. And I think that's a great segue to kind of start talking about some of the solutions. I mean, one solution that you're saying is romantasy genre can give alternative a model for this moving forward. Allison, any solutions that come in mind? What are what's the first thing that we need to do? What's the root of the problem that we need to address?
Well, I think it goes back to centering, right? And whose perspective is the one driving the conversation and the hierarchies and the structures. And what we're seeing is um, there's also a lack of confidence among students. And even if they are accomplished, they have credentials, they have talent, they're still not sure. And I think part of it is, yeah, there's lots of content that specifically women who, it just you were told always that you're not good enough in some way, or there is a type that should be successful, and that's what you should look like as a leader. I think we're making a lot of progress around that. I think that for students in general, what they really need and what we would like to think about is what is the roadmap for the industry so they really understand the options that are available and can pursue them with a greater deal of confidence and certainty because, the journey is getting harder. And we owe them that, but I think also the industry will thrive if it does a better job of giving people those pathways.
Rachel, same question for you, but I'd like to kind of hear your perspective to two audiences, right? We have the young cultural strategist or young person in the industry who wants to get into all this exciting work, but also at the same time, what's your message to brands? Because you have worked with, brands as well. What are what advice or would you tell them to help us kind of move the needle on this?
So the advice I would give actually interconnected across both of them. So I'll start with the young people first. It sounds kind of esoteric, but it's pretty straightforward. The front door of a lot of industries, including advertising, is like getting smaller, or it's closed, or it's locked. And I think collectively in like our social sphere, as I look at my career, really Allison's career, everyone's career who's done something in this industry, they don't have a linear path. And getting into this industry right now is going to look really squiggly, and everyone's talking about squiggly careers. But I think what's missing from the ad industry conversation in particular, and what we saw from the students who recognize that it's not going to look linear for them and it's really hard to get into this industry, you have to make an entry point for yourself, which is what we call making portals. And that can look like, making content on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, and making your perspective and your expertise known to the industry in a way that's hard to ignore. It doesn't mean you need to be a content creator, but I think in some way, if you want to be a creative in this industry, you probably need to be producing content in some form to create those entry points into brands through the lens of cultural intelligence. I also think it can look like finding opportunities to speak, be on podcasts. There's so many, even though the barrier to entry into this industry has never been higher, the barrier to entry to making your knowledge and expertise known has never been lower. So when we talk about making portals, it's finding ways to, there's a Steve Martin quote, be so good they can't ignore you. And that's my personal professional mantra. And I always tell young people that there's ways for you to make your expertise seen in culture. You just have to find those entry points. And for brands, what I would say is, we said in the beginning that the bureaucracy and the way that brands operate today is a little bit at odds with where society and culture is moving. I think brands have an opportunity to see that making a portal for somebody is a huge opportunity to reimagine how you operate as a business, right? The way that I work with brands is as an independent cultural strategist. I come from the agency world, and the way that I work is a little bit different than an agency might, but it suits the brand. I'm able to, work a little bit quicker, but I'm also able to help support and uplift agency work. So I would encourage brands to think about talent models differently, whether that's with freelancers or with your agency teams. Task them to think about a talent model that looks a little bit differently. That question comes a lot to agency teams to think more with more agility, but I think there's so many creative solutions that aren't being explored, or maybe aren't explored at scale. And in some ways, I wonder if agencies aren't pursuing them because clients aren't asking for them. And that can look like a lot of things like the flash team model, et cetera. So we think so much about creative work. I also think we need to think about the creative solution for talent too, to look a little bit differently.
I lied. I'll have one last question for you, Allison, since you're talking about talent. I know this is kind of like the first iteration of this study. Let's say I interview you 1 year from now. What would you have hoped to kind of move the needle on with all the work that you're doing?
Oh my gosh. There's so much that we could do. And, because as Rachel was talking, I think about what I wish somebody had told me when I started. And I also have an agency background, among other things. And, you get paid to have a point of view at the end of the day. And that is so much more essential now than it was when I started my own career, that that figuring out a way to lift that up and get that out, which, is the way you're going to make that portal. Because we're hearing such frustration with filing, applying for jobs online, and, really doubting a human reads
And even when
the
I'm thinking about when
application.
I was applying into this industry, I applied to hundreds of jobs back in 2013, 2014. I only got a job because I met somebody working at a retail store who helped me get an interview. Like, I had to make a portal to get into this industry. And I think that resonates with a lot of young people, like today, especially, like applying for jobs and you're not sure where it's going. I think it's been challenging for a little bit, maybe even broken. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it just really resonated with me.
No, it's so true because, and one of the things and it's not necessarily a study question, but we're seeing it with the students we work with. I mean, the students right now who are in college spent COVID going to high school in their bedrooms. And those personal networking skills are really something that they need to get comfortable with. And one of the things we're spending time with, on the fellowship is what we're terming the soft skills. But in reality, the soft skills are the new hard skills. And that's a change I think we can continue to make in our curricula and, other programs that we put forth.
I totally agree. I mean, at WARC, we cover marketing effectiveness. And of course, there's the science behind it and the measurement, right? But a lot of the conversations I've been having is actually tackling the soft side of effectiveness, right? Which comes down to talent, confidence to have a point of view, which is something that we need to instill in a lot of younger folks today, because that is how you're going to create that portal that both of you spoke about. And on that note, thank you so much to both of you for joining the WARC podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all we have time for today. Thanks to all of the guests for their time and expertise. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on your favorite podcasting platform. And to check out the rest of our content from Cannes Lions, check out warc.com.